Hello, everyone, both here and online. Welcome to the first edition of Public Miton Times. Since we've had some private history for the newcomers, it is a simple reading group where we want to discuss with everyone who's also interested some interesting machine learning topics. Today, please bear with us. There might be some technical quirks because this is, the first time that we're streaming online and we're using Zoom right now. We would really like to meet once every month, more or less, based on if we can find speakers and enough people who are interested. Usually we, discuss either our own work or somebody else's work. It doesn't really matter as long as it's machine learning related, and most of the people find it, interesting. My name is Antonín Hoskovec. I'm from GLAMI, and today we would like to speak about the future of AI regulations in the European Union. And the topic has been prepared by Radek Bartyzal.
Hi.
Speak about it for a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm also from GLAMI, I'm a machine learning engineer. So hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me fine. And yeah, I'll just test the. All right. Yeah. So as I said, I'm a machine learning engineer. I'm not a lawyer. So definitely, take everything I say with a grain of salt, and I'll try to, go through the future of AI regulation. How is it envisioned by the European Commission, which released recently in April the draft of the AI Act or Artificial Intelligence Act, and we'll take a look at what's in it. So first of all, when I say regulation, what does that even mean? Like, there are several types of legislation in the European Union, and regulation is the one that has to be applied to every member state in the EU in its entirety. As the way it is written, there's not that much space for interpretation as with the other types of legislation. So everything I'll be talking about today is going to be a regulation. And now the proposed legislations that are kind of in touch with the AI space, there are multiple of them by the EU. The Artificial Intelligence Act is the most comprehensive one. It basically covers the AI space, and there are different regulations. There are like the Digital Service Act, the Digital Markets Act, and then there is the Data Governance Act. These regulations are kind of related to the artificial intelligence space, but they are mostly about, for example, the data usage in the EU, or regulation of quite specific large online providers, which doesn't, I think, concern most of us, unless you work for Facebook or Google. So today we'll be talking about the Artificial Intelligence Act only. It's not going to be about the other legislations. Unfortunately, there's not enough time to cover everything, but definitely check them out. I put a lot of links into the presentation that will be shared with you after the talk, and you can read through it. Now, let's talk about the Artificial Intelligence Act. As I said, it's a proposed regulation. Right now, it's only a draft, but this draft has already been adopted by the European Commission, and it has been worked on for 3 years. So it's not like they just sit down and wrote some draft. No, it's a serious piece of legislation. It's around 100 pages long and contains several annexes. And the estimate is that it will take probably like 2 to 4 years to come into effect, because it still has to pass through the European Parliament. So, you know, it's hard to say when it will actually pass because there might be some changes to the legislation. You know, the process is long, so it might take some time. And usually when the legislation passes through the European Parliament, it still takes some time before it comes into effect, right? It was the same with GDPR. Maybe you remember it actually took about 6 years for GDPR from the draft being published to actually coming into effect. So we'll see how that goes with this act. Now, what are the goals of this Artificial Intelligence Act? Basically, the point is to reduce the fragmentation of the different regulations that are being kind of introduced by the different states in the Union. And it will hopefully provide clear definitions of AI systems and attempts to classify them based on their risk to people, you know, like the natural persons in European Union. And also, like the basic building stones of the regulations are the fundamental rights of EU citizens that it's attempting to protect. So there are actually quite a lot of those fundamental rights, and I would recommend to read through them. It's nice, you know. It's like a check of your values, and there are many interesting ones that are actually covered by the Artificial Intelligence Act, and they are in touch with the AI systems that are being deployed today. Like, if you can imagine, like right to a fair trial, you know, equality between women and men, the freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and stuff like that, workers' rights to fair and just working conditions. These are definitely aspects that can be influenced by AI systems that would be, you know, kind of used by, for example, the state or companies, and could lead to, you know, infringing on these fundamental rights. Now, you might ask, like, do we need more regulation? Like, is this necessary? Why don't we just let the free market regulate itself, right? The companies should be able to not create racist systems, for example. And I completely agree. I don't think that anybody's trying to create systems that are discriminating of, you know, minorities, or that someone is trying to create systems that lead to not fair workplaces. Unfortunately, it's not so easy to create AI systems that are fair. We have some ideas how to do it, but it's definitely hard. And I prepared some examples where currently used systems are not exactly working as intended. Now, this is, of course, like a little bit funny, not so serious example. It's not an AI system, it's a soap dispenser. And this soap dispenser is, you know, not dispensing soap, which is its primary function, to people with darker skin. So that's a fail. Now, like, there is another example that's a little bit more serious. Amazon tried to create a hiring system, you know, automate it, as they, you know, try to automate all parts of their company process. And they've realized that creating a fair recruitment system is actually harder for them than they realized, and they scrapped their system because it was biased against women. Now, you could say, okay, that's a great example of, you know, companies regulating themselves, and, you know, that would be great if all the companies showed this kind of attitude towards these systems. However, that's not entirely what's happening, because, for example, if you look at predictive policing, now there are a lot of issues with these systems. They are being deployed in European Union, in the US, and the bias analysis of these systems is, you know, quite debatable and not always published, and, you know, not always talked about in which depth it has been actually made. And there are further examples of systems that, you know, millions of people encounter, daily in the United States, for example. This is an example of an AI system that's being used by hospitals, and it's assessing how sick the patients, or let's say, visitors to the hospital are, and it's kind of triaging the care for them. And there was research published in the Science journal that found out that these systems are like incredibly biased against Black people. And that's crazy to me that the system is still being in use. It's being used for such a long time that there is now an article in the Science journal published about it. And it's, it's online and it's live, and it's causing like measurable harm to people. And this is something the AI Act is trying to prevent. It's trying to define the boundaries of these systems and what should we do to prevent these things from happening. I apologize for the yellow screen. I'll fix it in a moment. I can do it. Yeah, if you can, I'm not sure. All right, that should be better. Is it working? Yep. All right, sorry for the interruption. Okay, so the AI Act, the structure is that, first of all, there are some definitions, what actually is an AI system, we'll get to that. And then the AI Act tries to classify the AI systems based on their purpose and according to the risk they pose to society. And based on that classification, different kinds of requirements are being placed on the providers of these systems. So just because there is a regulation of AI systems doesn't mean that you'll actually have to, do some things mandated by the European Union. If your system is, for example, classified as a minimal risk system, which I would say is like a lot of them, we'll see it later, then you actually don't have to do anything. And we'll go through the different risk categories and we'll see what is kind of in there. And I think that you'll come to realize that it's really connected to the fundamental rights that I've talked about in the beginning. And you'll see them kind of reflected in the categorization of the systems that are being classified as either unacceptable risk or high risk, because these are the systems that are covered most by the regulation, that they bear like the most weight of the requirements. Now, we can ask about what exactly is the AI system, because of course, if you don't fulfill the definition of an AI system, this regulation doesn't apply to you. Unfortunately, the definition of an AI system is quite broad. It's basically, it consists of two parts. One of them is like this broad, couple sentences long definition that says it's any system that's capable of generating outputs such as content, predictions, recommendations, and stuff like that. And this basically covers almost any system that outputs something. But this system also has to use one of these more specific, let's say, techniques mentioned in a list that can be upgraded over time. Now, this more specific list is still pretty broad. Like there are currently 3 points in it. It covers all machine learning approaches, no surprises there. But it also covers all logic and knowledge-based approaches. So, okay, I guess. But it also covers all statistical approaches. And for example, Bayesian estimation, search and optimization methods. And now we're getting to the territory where basically anything that's processing a large amounts of data, or in some cases, not even large amounts of data, and it's doing some operations on top of the data, is classified as an AI system. Now, that might sound kind of alarmist, that yeah, everything is an AI system now, and everything's going to be covered by the regulation. Yes, sure, but as I said earlier, the AI systems are then categorized based on their risk, and if your AI system doesn't fall into the high risk category, it won't have any like significant requirements. Now, who does this apply to, like this regulation? The regulation applies to any AI system that impacts natural persons in the European Union. Natural person is just a human being. It's not like a legal person, you know, like a corporation. It has to impact natural persons in the Union, even if the system is operated from from outside of the European Union. So if you're reselling something, or if you're processing the data or running the machine learning algorithms in some different country, but then using the outputs of these AI systems in European Union, then this regulation will apply to. Now there is one exception. It's that this regulation doesn't apply to systems primarily for military use, like systems that were developed specifically for the military and are being used by the military. So there's this exception. I guess there are different regulations that cover these systems. So, but I don't know much about that. So if that's your case, maybe refer to your lawyer. Now we're getting to the actual classification of the AI systems. Now I'll start with the most serious one. It's the unacceptable risk systems. Now these AI systems are going to be banned in the European Union. Now ban it's like a very strong word. People usually get kind of scared by that. But actually, if we go through that, you realize again it's not so bad. You know, it sounds bad, but like there are four types of systems that are going to be banned in the European Union. The first one is usage of any subliminal techniques beyond a person's consciousness. Like what does that mean? It means something that you don't know is happening is basically changing your behavior for the worse. Now, it's only forbidden if it can lead to harm. Of course, most things can lead to harm, but yeah, banning subliminal techniques. A concrete example could be, for example, playing an inaudible sound, like a sound you can't hear, that is keeping you awake. Like, for example, if you're a truck driver and the company wants you to drive longer without falling asleep, they could play some sounds or do some things that would unconsciously change your perception of the world, or change your mental state. Now, then there are other technologies or systems, because it's not about technologies, it's about the systems and what their purpose is. Like, even if the technologies are very simple, they're not like neural networks. If the purpose of the system is to do some subliminal stuff, it's not going to be permitted. And another system that's going to be banned are systems that exploit vulnerabilities of specific groups of people. Now, that kind of makes sense. Again, it's about protecting, basically, for example, children or people with mental disabilities that simply could be more susceptible to certain techniques of, let's say, persuasion that could be applied to them, and again, change their behavior in a way that could lead to harm. And the third type of system that's going to be banned are social credit scoring systems by public authorities. This is like a direct jab towards basically the Chinese government that is implementing exactly this kind of system. some form of social scoring. And Europe, basically the European Commission says, we won't have anything like that in the European Union, even if the governments of certain states in the EU would like to implement some social credit scoring systems for their citizens. It's not going to be allowed because, as I said in the beginning, it's a regulation. It's going to apply to every state. There's no room for interpretation that, you know, could say, hey, we can actually do social credit scoring on our citizens because, you know, there are citizens and, you know, have jurisdiction here. Well, actually, the European Union does. And yeah, the last kind of systems that, like, firstly, it was supposed to be banned was this remote biometric identification systems, which basically means facial recognition, voice recognition, gait recognition, like this remote identification. But then as the discussions went on, this final draft basically has kind of watered down this, let's say, the effect of the regulation on these systems, because now these systems, if they are used in public spaces by law enforcement, they are not actually banned, but the law enforcement will have to acquire some, you know, a judge would have to sign off on that use. Like they will have to go through the legal system of the specific country, and if the legal system allows them to use these remote biometric identification systems, they will be permitted to. So this regulation kind of puts some barriers to using these systems by law enforcement in public places, but by no means is it banned. Like we see in the United States, for example, where there was like a similar case with the, you know, mass surveillance of American citizens that was not allowed only under specific conditions, for example, when preventing terrorist attacks. And yeah, it has kind of come to light that the mass surveillance was much more widespread than people thought. So it's possible that something like that could happen in some European countries where the courts will be more lenient than in other countries. So we'll see how that goes. Unfortunately, well, fortunately, depends on what's your take on that. But yeah, that's the state of the regulation right now. In the final draft, there might be some changes still before it actually comes into effect. So bear that in mind. Now we're getting to the main point of the regulation, and that's the high-risk systems. Basically, the vast majority of the regulation talks about these high-risk systems because they are the systems that will be that will have like the biggest requirements placed on their providers. Now, these high-risk systems, it might appear that there are a lot of them, but most of them kind of make sense in terms of the fundamental rights that we talked about earlier. And we can go through them. And basically, it's, again, the biometric identification and categorization of people. As you can see, when it's done by private companies, it's only a high-risk system. It's not banned. Like you can have a startup that's providing biometric identification, and it's going to be allowed. You'll just have to comply with some requirements that I will talk about later on. And they are not insurmountable. You know, again, I think they're actually quite reasonable. The next system is, for example, used for management or operation of critical infrastructure. Again, that kind of makes sense. We don't have to talk more about that. And then we have these two kind of systems that are, I would say, a little bit similar. It's the education systems and the employment and workers management systems. Now, they're kind of similar in a way where you shouldn't use AI systems in a way where they would discriminate against certain people during, for example, the filtering of the candidates or deciding on applications. So these systems are going to be considered high risk if you use systems used in employment, in workers management and stuff like that, and they will have to comply with the requirements. Now, I've listed some specific examples of what exactly they mean by workers management, and there is the screening or filtering of applications. So all these recruitment systems or systems that rank candidates based on their relevancy for a job posting, or systems that assign work in a workplace. These systems will be considered high risk because, as we saw earlier, one of the fundamental rights of the European citizens is a right to a fair workplace. So that kind of makes sense. Now, last one on this slide is the access to and enjoyment of essential private services and public services. Again, what's hiding behind this kind of long sentence is access to emergency services, makes sense, dispatching of ambulances and firemen, stuff like that. And then essential private systems, like, for example, banking. So credit scoring systems are also considered high risk. So companies that develop credit scoring systems will also have to comply with the requirements. Now, the list goes on, but this is the last slide of systems that classify as high risk. And these systems are systems used for law enforcement. Basically, anything related to law enforcement is going to be classified as high risk. Again, sounds reasonable to me. Then migration, asylum, border control. Again, almost anything related with these parts of government is going to be classified as a high risk system. And then administration of justice, that again kind of makes sense. One of the fundamental rights is the right to a fair trial. So the AI systems that intend to help judges to, for example, interpret evidence or come to some agreement or judgment, or in the ways of how to apply law, and these systems are definitely going to be considered as high risk systems. Now, for example, I can imagine a system that helps transcribe witness testimonies from their voice to text, or allows people to search through witness testimonies. Systems like that I can imagine being based on AI will be considered as high-risk systems. Right. Now we'll take a look at what are the actual requirements placed on the providers of these high-risk systems. So if your company is one of the companies being classified as a provider of a high-risk system, then these are the requirements that you would have to comply with. Now, they're like fairly split into, let's say, 5 points. The first one is about data, then some transparency for users. There is a part with human oversight, then some requirements for the accuracy of the system, and then traceability and auditability. Now we'll go through them one by one. If we start with the data, it's maybe the most controversial point in my point of view. It makes sense that the AI systems are being trained on data, of course, so we should analyze the data that flows into the systems, and we should ensure that the data is relevant, representative, and these are the exact words from the regulation. They're relevant, representative, free of errors, and complete. And this, I think, is kind of hard to achieve. What does that mean? Free of errors and complete? Free of errors, I can imagine, but complete, I don't know. So we'll see how that actually works out, but I like the idea that we should analyze the data as much as possible and find out if there are some biases hidden in the data that we didn't know about and that the system would probably learn, and then it would show up in its predictions, which is happening. Like, let's be honest, this is literally what's happening with all those racist systems that I have shown earlier. It's not that they've been developed by people that wanted to build racist systems. They didn't want to build an unfair system. It's just that probably there were some issue in the data or in other parts of the system, because it's not just about the data, right? If you clean the data, the algorithms themselves or the whole process surrounding them can lead to results that we don't want. Now, oh, right. Yeah, this is the point where with the transparency for users. So basically all high-risk systems will need to disclose their capabilities and limitations to their users. Usually the way I imagine it is that if you provide a system to some company that's using it, you should provide them with the proper documentation saying what are the capabilities and limitation of your system, so they know how it's, how does it make sense to actually use the system that you provide as a provider, a company developing the system or providing some service. Then again, the service should be described properly. And of course, the system's intended purpose. Then there are like many other things that you should, of course, explain to users, and you can find that all in the regulation itself. But I think there's nothing really like deal breaker or anything. I think it's fairly easy to do. Now there is a point of human oversight. This is another like interesting point where the goal of the human oversight is to minimize risk, and the system should be designed in a way that allows human oversight of the system. So there should be some people trained and being able to understand the system's capabilities, the system's limitations. They should be able to understand when the system is not performing as it should. There must be a possibility to override the system's prediction, let's say. So as you can see, it's a whole process where you have to integrate the possibility of human intervention into it. It can't be just a black box strictly connected to some decisions that fly out of them and they're being immediately applied. There has to be human in the loop that is able to monitor the system, is able to stop the system, override the system, and observe the system. But what's critical is that there is no need for full explainability of the system. So there is actually no need for anyone to know exactly what each one of those 300 million parameters in your neural network is doing, which probably wouldn't happen. So it's definitely nice to see that, it kind of makes sense. It's not a requirement that would be unmatchable. It's not something that couldn't be done, because if full explainability of the systems would be required, that would be incredibly hard to do, and we probably couldn't do it for majority of the machine learning systems today because they're very complex. But the full explainability is not required, so it should be doable. Then there is the point of accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity. And these basically circle around the accuracy of the system, that the system should have a consistent accuracy throughout its life cycle. The accuracy should be measured, it should be analyzed, and there should be the accuracy should be, of course, communicated. It should be satisfactory for the purposes of the system, and the system should also be robust to some inconsistencies in environment. So if some things changes or there are some edge cases, the system should be either able to handle them. Well, the whole system should be always able to handle them. There is a possibility that the system can handle them through the whole human oversight, right? Because the human should be now part of the system, as we saw in the human oversight part. And the system should prevent feedback loops. And for example, there should be a prevention of data poisoning attacks or adversarial attacks, which I think it's interesting that they actually included in the regulation, that it's you can see that they really consulted this with like machine learning experts, because adversarial attacks are quite like new, let's say a couple of years old, I would say, area of research where you're able to confuse typically a neural network to produce predictions that you wouldn't expect it to produce and it wouldn't normally produce, but you provide it with an input that's slightly modified in a very peculiar way that looks, you know, like it's harmless, but it completely changes the output of the neural network. And we know how to, well, there are techniques how to harden the neural networks or your models against these types of attacks. So it's definitely, again, it's an interesting point. It's doable. It will just require a little bit more work. Now, this is an example of the adversarial attack. You see there's like a normal stop sign. It's classified as a stop sign. Everything's working fine. Then you put this like weird sticker on it, and the system will suddenly classify the stop sign as a yield sign, which of course is a failure state. And this is actually possible to do in the real world. There are people that, you know, put some stop sign stickers on the back window of their car, and the Teslas driving behind them were just stopping constantly because they thought it was a stop sign. Or you can put some stickers on stop signs and make them kind of invisible to some self-driving systems. Of course, nowadays, the self-driving systems should be able to deal with those types of attacks. But in the beginning, the attacks were possible. So it's good to know about that. And then the last is the traceability and auditability, which boils down to 2 points. One is that you will be required to produce quite extensive technical documentation, basically documenting the whole process of complying with all the stuff that we went through the past 4 points. They all have to be, of course, documented. And there should be some risk management system in place, some data management systems and stuff like that. Basically, documenting every step of the way of complying with the points that were mentioned earlier. And all of them are specified in Annex 4. There's a link at the end of the presentation, so you can go through that. And then the traceability is that automatic logging is required. So the system should log what it's doing, should be automatic, and it should be on all the time. And of course, it's a new one. There will be an authority to register these high-risk systems with. They will be at each country. So there will be an EU member state government that you operate in, and you have to register your high-risk system at one of these EU member states. Now, I would end it like this discussion of the requirements of the high-risk systems with the fact that it's mentioned that in the regulation that self-assessment should be possible for all of these high-risk systems except the remote biometric identification systems. So this facial recognition systems, voice recognition, gait recognition systems, they are going to have to go through a third-party assessment, but all the other systems, so basically almost all of them, will be able to do some self-assessment procedure where they will comply with all of these requirements, produce some documents, probably the documentation, and then register with the local authority. They should receive some CE mark, you know, the classic CE label, the signifying that it's complying with the high standards of European Union and can be deployed and sold on European market. Now we're moving to the limited risk systems. These are systems that are obviously not high risk. They're systems that only have some transparency obligations. So there are none of the requirements that were mentioned earlier. Only thing that you have to do is, if you're not mentioned among the high risk systems, you have to be transparent when user is interacting with AI. So people have a right to know if they're talking to a computer or a person. So you have to be transparent about chatbots, stuff like that. And also there is a need for transparency about emotion recognition and categorization. So whenever there is a system that's categorizing or detecting people's emotion, then all of these systems, no matter what they're used for, which is the difference with the high-risk systems, which were always defined by the purpose of their systems. But in the case of this technology, emotional recognition systems, they always have to say, like, you have to be transparent about their usage. So people have a right to know if you're doing some emotional classification, if you're detecting whether they're happy or sad or something like that, then you have to be transparent about that. But that's it. And the last point is that you have to be transparent when content was generated or manipulated by AI system to falsely represent its content. Now that's interesting. Like, what does that mean? It's against deepfakes. We kind of expected that. But you can imagine that, for example, if you take a picture with your iPhone, the picture is kind of edited, right? There is some post-processing. And this post-processing is being done by some machine learning algorithms, usually nowadays. And the question is where to draw the line of where are you like editing the image in a way that it's starting to falsely represent its content. Now, this is an example of I taken from some machine learning paper. Like on the left, there is low resolution image. On the right, there is the same image in high resolution. And the left center column is just a simple interpolation. Like we kind of interpolate the pixels and we create a high resolution version of the low resolution image, but just by, you know, averaging the colors of the pixels between them, which I would say is not like falsely representing the image, but there are pixels that weren't there before, of course. So is it, you know, a different image? Hard to say. And then the right center column is image generated by some generative neural network that's trained on the human faces. So it kind of knows how an eye looks. So if you tell the system that, hey, this area, this 9 pixels is an eye, it's going to put some generic eye in there that's going to kind of correlate with the colors of these pixels. And it's going to look like a human eye, right? But that's not what the pixels show, right? And now, is this okay or is this too much? I would say that this is falsely representing the content because it's kind of hallucinating the content based on the training data. But some people might say that, you know, hey, it looks good enough to me, so maybe it's fine. I don't know. I would say that it's definitely very hard to draw a line somewhere between post-processing, that's, you know, just sharpening, for example, and some AI sharpening and upscaling where you're kind of using information from elsewhere, and it's hard to say how precise it is. Now, we're nearing the end. The enforcement is similar to GDPR. if you're not going to like comply with these requirements, you can be fined up to 6% of global revenue. It's based on like the seriousness of the, of how much are you not complying. Makes sense? And yeah, so the conclusion is basically that the technologies themselves are not getting banned. Like it's the systems based on their purpose are being regulated, and some are being banned, but most of them are not. Most uses are fine, and the uses that have capability of causing harm to people or on infringing their fundamental rights, then these systems will have to comply with stricter requirements. Basically, they will have to be analyzed more, they will have to provide technical documentation, etc., as we talked about. And that's all from me. Thank you for the attention. And we can come to questions. I see, are there some questions in the in the chat? All right.
I wanted to apologize first for not mentioning that you should pose the questions to Zoom, but we caught up during the presentation, right? And so there have been a couple of questions.
Okay.
So the first one was about the definition of unacceptable and high-risk AI systems. So Matthias asked, what about recommender systems in e-shops?
Right. So yeah, the recommendation systems are not like directly mentioned, I believe, in this regulation. So there is a separate regulation, the Data Providers Act, or I don't know which one of those, but it regulates usage of recommender systems on the online platforms, the big ones with 45 million users plus, so Facebook and Google. But I'm honestly not sure about the regulation on smaller e-shops or smaller online platforms. I think that there will probably be some like basic transparency requirements based on the like minimal or limited risk systems, but I haven't like researched that further, so I'm not sure now.
Okay.
I was just asking regarding what you said was that you shouldn't exploit any vulnerabilities of like specific people, and that's basically what marketing does. So I think it's going to be really hard to draw a line between where it's okay and where it's not, because like when the recommender system recommends me something so that I should buy it, I wouldn't buy it normally. So it's kind of exploiting my
definitely good point. And it's hard to say how it will shape out. Yeah, we'll have to wait, I guess, for the moment it goes into effect.
Yep. Which again, I forgot to mention. Feel free to unmute and openly discuss, as Matthias did. I hope it was obvious enough. But
yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, exactly. And so another question is from Milan. Do you think that social media ranking algorithms, as we know them, may fall into the subliminal techniques beyond a person's consciousness?
Yeah, exactly. The social media ranking it has a special regulation basically for it, and it's currently applicable, or it's a draft still, but the draft is applicable to the very large online platforms, and they will have to comply with some stricter requirements based on the ranking algorithms they use on their social media sites. Yeah. Nice. So, but I guess even on smaller sites, it will definitely fall under some part of regulation of this act, because it doesn't make sense to me for it not to be regulated at all. I think, as Matthias said, it will probably fall under some parts. I'm just not sure which ones now.
Yeah. So anything else to this question?
Right. Maybe I have.
Maybe I was just curious whether this would really fall into the subliminal techniques beyond a person's consciousness, because I think that there's this discussion on people being addicted on like the dopamine social awards that social media give them, which I would consider beyond the person's consciousness.
Yes, of course, of course. Now it depends, like if you drink Coca-Cola and you get addicted to sugar, you know, and you're not conscious about it. I think it's hard to draw the line and to say which systems are going to fall under which category with this, because I completely agree with you. I'm just not sure how it's going to be interpreted by the courts. Yeah.
And Coke has the advantage they don't use AI in the product, but
At least not openly, right? And I heard Pavel wanting
Yes,
to
just
highlight.
maybe some practical example. If I making the AI which predicts something in medicals, and many diseases depends on things like race, age, or even sexual orientation, will be possible to make such systems?
Well, I mean, it's talking about biases. Of course, it will be possible. Like you will control for these, you know.
But these biases are important, because if you are, for example, black, you have bigger probability to have a cancer of penis, for example. So this is the key of this prediction system.
Yes, of course. But I'm talking about the biases. Of course, there can be like biases like that, but I'm talking about biases that are not present in the real data, right? That the system inserts new biases into the system that are not supported by the underlying data.
So am I understand it right that if I will make the prediction system, which the personnel systems, and I will have the data that the black people are not good in some job, I can do this solution based on their race?
Well,
if it's data.
Well, of course, it depends if the data is relevant, representative, complete, and free of errors. And in that case, I would say that it's fine, but I think that you would have trouble providing data that is representative and relevant and free of errors. Usually, if you source the data from, you know, racist sources, then the data is going to contain racist biases, and then the systems trained on that data are going to further, you know, extrapolate these biases. So
I also think that the purpose is important here, because like if you're looking for the biases to, you know, mitigate the like what you think is wrong with the world, I think it might not be considered, you know, harmful. But if you want to use the system to not hire women, then, you know, the purpose is wrong. But
But where is the border of this? What is the good purpose,
well,
and what is the
difficult,
bad purpose?
Right? I mean, it's a difficult question, of course, and I think this is like the first part of the conversation. They already had like conversation for 3 years. Now there is this draft. There will be more conversations, and after it comes, you know, it gets applied, then the regulation will receive even more discussion from the public, and the courts of the interpreted. So I think it's a never-ending discussion, right?
And will be some office that will decide the border for every cases that you. Am I understanding this well?
Yeah. I think
they said this is over the border and this is not, or it will be up to the officers, or.
Yeah, there will be some institution, but I'm not really sure about the roles of the institutions in the system. I didn't go deep into that part, so maybe you know, I would refer you to the legislation text, because there is definitely a quite extensive description of these institutions and their roles in the in like classifying the systems, and of course all the like examples, they can be extended. Like the regulation is not fixed. The annexes that contain a lot of information, a lot of specifying information to the general text can be edited, and they are designed to be expanded or contracted based on the evolving situation in the world and I guess the discussion with the public.
But it's true that I can collect information like sexual orientation, age, and race, and so on. It's not, the data can be collected with.
I think you need to be transparent about it.
Yes, I think you can collect the data, yeah.
That depends on GDPR.
Yeah, exactly. There are, again, there is a GDPR, so yeah, if you comply with other regulations that, yeah. But I think this regulation does not prevent you from collecting data. Yeah, and maybe we'll give,
thank you.
Thank you for the questions.
Right. So another question from Martin is, about the requirements for high-risk AI systems. Isn't it hopefully somehow about making best effort or making sure there is a process that makes relevantness and representativeness and all of these things that are addressed and to be made better perpetually, like in ISO certifications? It was quite a long question, but I think that Martin wanted to comment,
I think I understand the point,
purpose,
and I agree that I think in general the regulation is quite, I would say, like positive and forward-looking in that it's trying to say, hey, if these systems are capable of causing harm, you should really take a good look at them. And there is also mentioned that I didn't talk about is that you should analyze like possible misuses of your system, and you should also think about those, and you should be able to incorporate that and try to prevent as much misuse as possible of your systems to minimize the harm, minimize the possible risk, because of course there is still going to be some risk, but yeah, you should give the best efforts to minimize that.
Right. Martin mentioned that he's going to be AFK, but I don't know if he is right now. So another question is the last one in the chat is from Milan. He says that he's curious about how the usage of emotions is defined. Because, for example, a voice chatbot deciding whether the customer is satisfied or unsatisfied with the service, Milan would not consider this emotional, but once it learns to recognize the customer sounds really angry, that sounds like an emotion.
Yeah, I think that's another example of quite a hard to define boundary, because again, I completely agree that the emotional detection, I think, I'm not sure where did these parts exactly come from to the regulation, but I believe that's like the emotional recognition is not believed to be very exact science, let's say, possibly because you're trying to somehow define how the person is feeling based on some external factors, and that's possible to a certain degree. But yeah, this regulation basically just says that you should be transparent about it when you're doing it. So if the chatbot just says, or there is some marker somewhere saying, hey, this chatbot is trying to guess how you're feeling in order to improve our customer service, then I think it would be fine. And yeah, if it's the minimal risk system, which chatbots are, I think, even specifically mentioned that they are like the limited risk system that just has to be transparent about the fact that you're talking to a machine and that the machine is trying to analyze your emotions, let's say. And I think that should be fine if you're transparent about it. If it's a chatbot for, I don't know, like buying shoes or something, of course. If it's a chatbot for law enforcement, then it's something different.
Right. Is there anything else to comment or another question to this? If not, we got one more question by somebody using Galaxy S7. Right. And the question is, where can you find the draft of those acts?
Yes, I have the links in the presentation. The presentation will be provided to definitely. I think it can be uploaded to the meetup page.
Yeah,
maybe?
yes, we're gonna post the links to the recording to the meetup event, or just feel free to contact us. You can find the emails or.
Yeah, but basically all the citations, I have them all in the right here at the last 2 slides. There are quite a lot of them. So yeah, you can read basically about anything that I've talked about today. There are links for that, and we will provide the presentation to the meetup event page, I think.
Yes, exactly.
So it will be there. If you check tomorrow, I think it should be there.
Yeah,
hopefully.
The recording should only take a couple of hours to process, and then we're going to post everything at once. Okay. Great. So are there any more questions? Does anybody want to add anything?
To unmute yourself.
Exactly.
I guess not.
Right. So if not, I want to thank Radek again, because I think he prepared a really nice presentation. It was very in-depth, and I would say I have a lot of questions myself for later and reading to do. So the last thing to say is the next meetup or Miton times are going to be held on 15th of February. So in about a month, we're going to post again the events to the meetup. So if you follow us there, you're going to get a notification, or again, just come talk to us. Feel free to reach out. Also, if you have any suggestions, again, feel free to get in touch. And
yeah, maybe you can talk what will the next talk will be about, because I think it's important to say that most of our talks are going to be like really technical, some deep dives into some machine learning papers. This was kind of an exception. That was not that technical, but yeah, the next talk will be right on that.
Yes, and I will talk a little bit about the equivariant neural networks, because we are using them in a research done together with the Motel Hospital for like medical image processing, I would call it.
Definitely a high-risk system.
Right. Well, one more thing, about the organization is the invitation says 2 hours, but we usually keep it at about 1 hour. And then, if there are more questions, we extend, but the presentations are usually, I don't know, 45 minutes long. I'd say.
And can be even shorter.
Sure.
Depends on the event. And if you come to the physical meeting place, then we can later come to have some beers and chat about the topic some more if you feel like it.
Yes. And the idea is to get to know each other a little bit. So right now we have a short list of topics, but if you have anything that you would like to share, again, get in touch, or I will be getting in touch. I promise. Right.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's it. Yeah.
And we'll be looking forward to seeing you next time.
Exactly. Bye.
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 Thanks a lot.